Okay, and we are, hold on, let's make sure before I get excited. All right, we are live. What's up, guys? So what we're going to be doing today is going over the code I have for a, let's turn that up. The code we've been working on for a bot that can test emotional sentiment, based off of user input, conversation stuff. So we're going to go over the code for that, look over that a little bit, and talk about that, get really in depth. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the chat. This is going to be like a in-depth coverage, so anything you need answered, we're going to go over. First things first, we're going to do a brief overlook of what we're going to be doing with this bot. So first things first. Oh, jeez. 2 seconds. Okay. Nope, that's not. All right. So we're gonna blow this up a little bit more. So what we're looking at here is the Uml diagram. Essentially, what'll happen is the user will give an input through our chat app. It'll just be conversational. It'll go to our API that divvies it up. A key part of what makes this bot so difficult for us to design is the layering to it. The MVC portals, what we're doing is we're going to have an online interface that's a web portal that allows administrators to see the graphical data in progress from the users via conversational. It's basically, the intent is to monitor emotional behavioral patterns, or like if you're on new medication or bipolar disorder, something like that. It's for patterning. But this data is going to collect and aggregate. We're using the Louis in NLP framework, which is Microsoft Azure's framework for chatbots, conversational and context. It's more of their machine learning algorithms that basically learn off the data given of how people speak and speech patterns. So we're going to be using that. Another trick to this one is there's not really any information out there that I could find on setting up a strictly SQL server to store the data in. To be honest, that was the biggest issue, was figuring that out, which not a lot of cases you'd want to do that. But in this case, for demonstrative purposes, we wanted to set it up this way. So we're going to go over how we set it up for SQL and how we're actually able to access that database for our sentiment and relay it to the MVC stuff. So with that, okay. So what this is our code. We're working in C# for this one. Mainly, ASP.NET applications is the way to go as far as building the web portal and everything like that. So, yeah, I am a nerd. Thank you very much. So what we have here is the bot itself functions there's a lot of layers to this code, and I'm probably going to have to organize it better. But what we have here is basically the code itself for the bot is laid out here. This is it basically giving all the directives of what it's accessing to learn from. So the different scripts we have working on it, the different layouts we have going with it, that's what we're going to be messing with here. These are actually the different dialogues. Those are us creating the classes for the different dialogue pathways for when it triggers different conversational dialogues. We have so this is just us laying all of it out. These are the different intents based off of it. So to explain how this works, Louis AI qualifies what a user's saying by different intents. And what an intent is basically, if I say, go get that cup, the intent is you retrieve the cup. So it'd be like, get cup would be the intent. An intent is what they mean when they say, or what they're meaning to say. So the trick here was for us to find a way to kind of batch quantify the emotional responses you'll be getting. So we layered them out you know, happy, lonely, sad, angry, and we tried to get specific, but we don't really have time for the scope of we had to dive into it. So this is where we're at right now. But what we're doing is we're identifying these different intents, and you can see on Louis AI's interface, this is the window for the actual AI. Our different intents are all laid out here and mapped. So what happens is we essentially have this code laying out the triggers for what equals what, where everything's going. And what we're going to do is we're going to use those intents and those entities. Entities are descriptive factors. So like a person would be an entity. So if Charles is a person, Charles is one of the entities identified. So we'd save Charles there. Going from there, that's the concept of how our bot's understanding. Now the way we're logging it, this is where it got tricky, because normally it's just going to store it. There's a lot of tutorials to use Cosmos DB and a lot of JavaScript tutorials, but there's none for using the methods that a lot of us are taught with SQL and MVCs. It's an old-fashioned one. It's kind of useless except for this specific use case, but it's one of those things where we figured it out slowly. So if we look here, this is a routine on the bot essentially, and what this does is this creates data such as like the conversation state data, the token of where they're talking from, the identifier of the user, like unique user tokens. This also got a conversation path to recognize their name and store their name. So what this does is we configured it to where it's pulling data from the bot itself and storing that data into formatted SQL. And so like right here's where we're actually storing, and this is very important. We're going to get a little bit more into this in a second after we get through this overview. But essentially what you're looking at here is this is us committing it to our database here, to our table, which is user logs. So if we were, so as you can see in user logs, once it loads, this is how it stores data. So like the username would be Matt. This is the token of that user ID that's assigned to them. So this is basically what the identifying user profile would be. The channel is how they're speaking. So like if they're speaking to you through Telegram, it wouldn't be Emulator, it would just say Telegram. The date that it was created, their time, and then local time, it converts it to your time. So it goes off server time, and it also stores conversation time. This would be the string from the actual conversation that we're storing. This is the actual name of the conversation piece that's stored. Now, the reason you're seeing these responses as null is because they're happening outside of this process, because they're happening before it's triggered. And now what we did here, and I'll show where we did this code-wise. Oops. I think it's 12, right? I'm not updating it. What you can see from these, this integer here is we're assigning a number to every intent. Yeah. We got it to store data. We're good now. So what we're doing here is we're storing the data that, and this all took a lot of time. Like you said in the chat, Ashmi, this took a lot of time to figure out how to do, right? Because there's not really a guide on it, so we kind of, and I'll explain how we got in to do all that, because that's what we're going to do to access it. Yeah, dude, I'm super excited. Like, I'm so happy for it. So what we have here is an integer that we're assigning to each one. So basically, not only do we have a string that identifies each intent, we also have an integer associated with it, and that's going to make it easier for when we graphically show the data. We can actually just assign ints to it. Now what we have here, okay, so I don't know if this is 100% working right. We're going to have to double check it. What this does is this is supposed to store the sentiment. So we assigned it a int of 1, 0, or -1, and I think we may be off. I may have to change that. And 1 being positive, 0 being neutral, -1 being negative. And that's a good way for us to scope it. There's a lot of neutrals involved just because that's, you know, there's not really a lot of connotation assigned to a lot of stuff. But, okay, so I have to fix this. Why aren't we working here? Okay, whatever. There we go. Okay. So the reason we did that is we needed to be able to access the data on our own terms and access it locally. And quite frankly, all of the services offered out there that are compatible with any .NET, mainly Azure stuff, are expensive. And it kind of became more of a challenge to where I wanted to show that we could make this work the way we needed to. And it was particularly not fun. So this is us assigning the database EDB entities. This is us creating a new user log. So if it's a new conversation, that's it's instantiating it, and this is us just updating it. Now what happens here is this is basically set up to trigger every response from the person and save every response and the data associated with it. So in the conversation state accessors, this is us just making sure the data is up to date each time. So what it's checking for here is if the user's name is stored and that token's already been stored. Yeah, we're going to get to that, buddy. I'm covering everything today for the bot. So we're going to figure out how to store that. We're going to do everything we can. We're just going to have to work through it the best we can, man. So in the user.firstName, that's basically saying if that variable is not filled with the token, identify the first name, and that starts a conversation path of just like, what's your name? And you say what your name is, gives it back. It's not that hard. We're parsing out the string from it to where, like, if your name's Bob, it'll identify you saying my name is Bob, or, you know, Bob or whatever. It'll fill that in. So yeah, this is where it gets tricky. So the bot script, and we're going to demo it. We're going to explain how it all works as a whole. So the bot script as a whole is directed by the main dialogue. And what's so difficult that we had so much trouble with was I was being silly and not thinking of like properly how object-oriented programming works. But essentially what we did was we set up a switch to where whatever we say to the bot and the bot controller, we have another script set up called a motion recognizer. And what that does, this won't really have to be edited too much. This is actually just conveying our information in our key to the Louis.ai Azure server service. And that's basically setting it up to where when we send something, it's formatted as an HTTP request to the domain that we're trying to speak to, and then it sends back the response in a format to where our code can understand, oh, this is an intent. So like, this is basically it just setting up the emotion and recognizer, and then we have another thing called emotion dialogue, I believe. No, emotion detection. .ex. Yeah, and this is like how it actually formats and finds everything for us. So that's how we configure Louis. You don't really have to wrap your head around that too hard for this one. But if you look in the main dialogue here, what we have is we set up a switch to where it basically, if it doesn't get a response, go straight to the begin dialogue, the chat dialogue. But if Louis does respond, the variable we created, louis.result.intent topintent.intent is a local variable we created to pull from that Louis recognizer. And what that does is that identifies whatever the response is, it uses that switch to tell it where to go. And that's where it got tricky, because we were trying to figure out how to pass this bit along, the intent dot, or the topintent.intent, and we had a little bit of trouble with the formatting. But then it kind of occurred to me, I don't really have to. I can literally just pass along a string and pass along all the values we need. So once we were able to pass all of that along, the format we needed to, it was very easy to wrap our heads around how this code works. So what this does is this saves this to a class we created called Louis Details. And this stores the data to this class basically locally, so our code passes along, and it goes back to that dialog bot code we had, which I showed a second ago. And what happens is up here, the same way we're pulling the conversation data and creating variables, I created a current intent number, current intent, and current sentiment. And basically we created this class here, or this variable here, to access the class, and that's how we're able to pass it along here. So if you see where new user.intent, current intent is, current number, current sentiment. So this code, every time a user response happens, it's logging. So what this is telling it is every time find that stored class of Louis intent that's updating each time, and that's how we were able to pass it along. So we're accessing this class. So if I were to recommend like a way to think about this, so let's open up an Excel sheet to show how this data is going to be accessed as far as visualizing it for MVC access. So let me open Excel up real quick. We're about to get hot and heavy. And then we're going to explain how this distributes through the server, and then we're going to move on from there of how to access this. So to visualize the data, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create like intent time. All right. So we would have the dates laid out numerically. So say our intent number is, or let's say sentiment. Let's do sentiment. So we're going to show if they were happy or sad over an amount of time. So we're going to put our sentiment there. And if we remember from our code, our sentiment is either going to be a 1, a 0, or a -1. And so let's add some data in there. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take the date, let's just say, actually let's just do time to make this easier so I don't have to do the formatting. You know how to format date. Yes, Alex, I'm going to post this video for, it's going to be posted on this channel, and I'll have a higher res one that I can send you guys. So yeah. So let's just say time. So we're gonna do like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7. No, I have to. 7 a.m., 6 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. Now, the format of the data is going to be date time, so it's going to be a little more complicated than that. I just don't feel like formatting for the sake of this. So let's go ahead and take it, and we're going to say to visualize it, to let you see how the data is going to look. Wrong one. There's a specific format I'm looking for. I'm winging this right now. Apologies for the lack of adventure. Time should be the... Oh, it's supposed to be sporadic. My bad. Whatever. So the time itself should not be that periodic and checked in. But let's just, for the sake of showing you how the data kind of needs to be visualized, we're going to have to show it crossing that x-axis. And that's why making sure that x-axis is shown will really help there. But for the sake of showing this, just so it's not...
Hungry eyes, but they can't tell that I am not another one. If they take
So I'm trying to figure out how to do this. I'm not 100% which graph will be the proper representation, so it's not going to be great, but you know, we'll
it sounds morbid, but it's fun.
So there's multiple graphs we can do too that also show like sentiment. So like this way of visualizing data, all we have to do is have the chart that shows the positives and negatives, and that's literally what I was looking for, was the checkpoint, but we need to have it going horizontally, not vertically. So that would be a way to plot it. Another way would be to have like the intent number. That can go from like 1 to I think 36. So like and also feel free if there's any questions, if you want me to like explain anything as we do this, let me know in the chat, and I will address them. There's no need in being confused. So let's say we have times, and these don't have to be sequential. I don't know why I did that way, because I'm being silly. And just think of these as representations of time, and like AM, PM. I'm not going to get into increments and stuff. Like I said, this has to be formatted a lot differently, but and we're just going to do military time because I'm lazy. And I know for a fact this is a proper APA, so don't stress that on my end. But like these can be better formatted. I think a better one for this would be like bar charts, because then we can see like the actual like which ones at what time frames. So we're able to see amounts. These are just ideas. Put time on the left. Yeah, that's actually, you're 100% right. My formatting is shit. Thank you very much. I forgot how to use. I went balls deep on this video. Thank you. Hopefully something. I went really hardcore on just jumping right into this, and I didn't even stop and think it's been a second since I've really done Excel. That's gonna fix it so much, actually, I bet. Yep. So now what this would be is this would be displaying the like amount of an intent is called. So what your max was, what your mean was. Like that's just gonna be aggregation. Pie charts could also be a thing on this one. Well, that would be time increments, so I'd have to reverse it on that one. All we need is love, then why do we
take all these drugs.
And I'm just doing this to show like ideas of how you can kind of see how we'd visualize it. It's not 100% right on the money, but maybe I'm gonna have to flip the X and Y on the grid. We're not getting into Excel necessarily. This isn't necessarily an Excel lesson. I don't really want to get into Excel. Okay, yeah, this would be, so yeah, this would be the proper way we could format and label it too, would be a pie chart. There's all kinds of stuff we can do. That would be the return to show like, so basically we would aggregate this sentiment data and you can kind of see how we pull that. Just a rough idea. That wasn't a great example, but it's enough to see kind of where I'm going with it. So what we also have working here is, this is where it got kind of tricky because all of the other tutorials that I could find were explaining how to build a bot that only functioned as a bot. And there were some that had like interfaces that worked in JavaScript and stuff, but I thought it was really weird that there wasn't really any Azure bot that focused on ASP.NET or anything that focused with like MVC tools or working with, and I know that's kind of a weird thought, but in this case this is kind of what we needed, was an all-in-one package. So what we ultimately did was, first things first, we had to set up this whole routing setup, basically that worked as a way of routing the domains of what would be accessing what when we opened it. And then we created our MVC. So we created a home controller that basically accesses the user logs. We have a whole controller that we generated that straight up off the database, to where when you run it, we have an entire home setup. Well, for right now, we're gonna have to polish this more. We're actually gonna have to format all of this. This is gonna take a little bit of work here. But basically we have our index landing page that's pulling from our model, pulling from everything we need here. I'm going to have to, I think, upgrade all of this. All of this is going to have to be regenerated actually, because now our new code, I think, makes it different. Yeah, so this is missing the intent stuff and everything we added. So if we're going to have to redo that. So let me see if I can actually do that right now. Because we would go up here to controllers. Yeah, I'm going to have to go through and figure out where I'm adding this to. So we're going to have to add the new functions like the intent number and the sentiment stuff that gets passed on there. But you can still see how it works when we pull it up. So what I'll do is I'll run it so you can see an example of what it looks like running. And then I'll get a little bit more in depth into the functionality, and you guys can ask any questions or whatever. So what we're gonna do for this is we just click run, and it should build out pretty quickly. All right, cool. So it'll go ahead and open this landing page here for us, which would be the home page, which is what the MVC is. So this is what automatically happens. And if you like this bot stuff and you're not here on a quarter of the project, feel free to give it a like and subscribe. I do a video every day. I would really appreciate that. That helps me keep doing this. So we have a 404 on that. Weird. Oh, I know why. Because I'm stupid. Sorry about that, everybody. Let's go back to here. I'm silly. Yeah, because user logs has to be reformatted now. So the way we did have it showing the graphs, I'm probably going to have to update that code and post that later. Do an update on that one. But here you'll see this is actually the link for the API that we pass along, so that we can connect the bot, which is right here. So now what we're going to do is this is where we're going to visualize the data. We had it laying the tables out, and I totally forgot to upgrade the code after I added the intents and stuff. So after we do all this, if we got time or if you guys want to, I can walk through adding that so you guys can see how we would add the code anyways. It could be mundane though, so I'm not going to. But alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to open up the Microsoft Bot Emulator, which is how we're accessing our bot to test it. And I already have the API and all of our access code here, so we pop that in and it's going to go ahead and start. This is where our bot prompt starts. Start, type anything to get started. This K, this is that null K that we kept seeing in the data. So say our name's Bob. Alright, cool, type anything. Okay, so this is where the new one splinters off. This is basically the receipt from our dialog bot code, returning out sorry, this is basically the code from the dialog bot code that was registering every message. It's a receipt showing us what was saved. So then here we would probably just say chat. We're just going to go ahead and do the chat to start the chat function. User, can we talk? That's the right intent. It's 91.3% sure of that. Cool. So it started this new one, the can we talk. So ask how we are. This is where we're going to test the emotion sensibility. I'm not good. This one always trips it up. We haven't really trained the data a lot, so this may mess it up. Oh, it really did trip it up. Let's try that again. And there's a lot of configuration stuff as far as like it resetting back to starting points and stuff that haven't been done. There's a lot of polish that needs to go on it, but this is the functioning one right now. Let's just say this to show you what it's supposed to do. Oh, it just straight up encounters a bug, period. Oh, because it doesn't know what to do yet on it. All right, well, I don't have a response set. As you can see, it does recognize sentiment. I just have to configure that properly. We have older models that show it where it returns the sentiment. The sentiment that's registered with I'm good is what it's trained on, the same way it saw where chat said that. Still sloppy. There's still bugs in how this one's configured because there's the new domain. The problem with it, I'll show you right here. What ends up happening is, so we get to and these are all the different intents that it can register on the switch. So right here, what it does is when it registers the intent, can we talk? It hands it off to the chat dialog, which is the next dialog it's going to, which is right here. And as you can see, I have it set up to where it registers what to say, but it breaks whenever it gives an emotional intent here. And I'm still trying to figure out why. Well, I'm not trying to figure. I think I know why. Sloppy code, sloppy code, sloppy code. But this is where it's passing to. So this is like the next intent here, where it asks how are you, and that's where it triggers from. So I've just got to let that flow. But as for that's the dialogue end. That's my real hardcore aspect on the project. I've been working so hard to get the other stuff put together. I've been neglecting that, so now I've got to dive back into it. But the way we're accessing our classes to store and manipulate data here is demonstrated in DialogBot. We have to create controllers to format and access what we're creating. So the classes we have of Louis Details Sentiment, they're straight up just accessing the Louis Details class that we've already established. And we're passing that along as a variable. So if you were to say want to visualize that, you would access these the same way and format them and string them out, and just that's where you would just pull the variables the same way you would, and then make the arrays or whatever you want to do to manipulate it. When we go live, we're using IIS Express, which is like the localization server. Alex, this is what you were asking about. We're using the localization server for Visual Studio. It's basically how we get our localhost feeds. You can make custom localhost landing sites, but pulling data from a localhost is particularly tricky as far as straight through our SQL server. The way we're going to have to do it is the same way user logs accesses it. And user logs is broken right now because it's not, I forgot the formatting stuff to change. But if you look here, you'll see that we're creating the variable user log, which is them just accessing the database user logs find ID, and that's how we're pulling it. So you're going to have to build a controller, say for Xamarin. In our case, we're creating an Android app through Xamarin. What we would do is we would actually just we would use these codes to access it. Well, that's just if something's wrong, but we would be using these codes to make the call through our local host. So we would have to basically use the address that we've assigned to it, which we'll go through that in detail. I'm gonna have to do a lot more reading on it, but we're basically just creating this access point and passing it along as a variable. So these universal variables are how you're going to be able to access it via an app. So the same way this user logs controller is accessing our database up here, you're going to have to build a controller for the application that formats your data the same way this is all being formatted to have an output, and this is all being formatted to turn out. You're going to have to format it to go out to the database. So a good starting point if you were trying to build an application, especially to access your SQL server, is this will have to run first, which means you're going to have a controller that's feeding out, same way this is feeding out here /user logs, you're going to have to build a controller that's like feeding out /app or /whatever. And that's where you're going to have your controller feeding out to. And then you're going to have it to where your application is accessing the server through there, and that controller is giving all the API calls. So all of the calls that you're, and I don't have an app handy. We have one we're working on, but I don't have it handy. All of your API calls would be going through that HTTP request with the formatting at the end for like /apps or whatever. So you're going to have to build a controller similar to this one. You can use this one as a template, but you're going to have to look at how you would have to format it to build a controller to host it for Xamarin. So however your Xamarin stuff would have to access it, you're going to have to format to accommodate, or vice versa. Does anyone have any questions or anything right now? Anybody? Fair enough. So, like I said, drop a like or subscribe if you're not part of the group on this. I'm not gonna hold my group ransom because we're just going over code. But there's a lot of stuff that needs polish. I'm gonna have to reformat the user logs before I pass along the updated version of the code to everybody. Once we're okay, so the controller you're building accesses your database essentially through these calls here. So the same way where your home, when the bot turns on, this home controller or your controllers automatically are functioning and they create a directory. So you understand how to connect it. So once you're connecting it, you're pulling your data. So like userlog.db userlog find ID. So right here, say that you wanted to return view user log. Say you're wanting to find I'm find a better example.
I'm just not that happy of a person.
Sure, whatever. where it says userlog.find, you're basically going to ignore the null thing. This is me demoing it. This is not where it goes. I'm just showing kind of how the code would look. I'm not really super sure on it, but this is how the code would kind of look. You would take that user log, I don't know, so like username equals user log dot name.
Even when I feel happy for like a few moments, just the next few minutes, I'll just like go back to feeling like shit again. I guess I just basically kind of hate myself.
Here's your goddamn song for the end of the world.
And then like we would create like a class. So say you would have some kind of class that you create called username, and then you would just have like it's that easy. You're basically just gonna pass that variable along. So like where it's username, and then say your format's gonna be like, I don't know what the output for your thing would necessarily look like, but that's not right. I think it would be an async function. No, I don't know how this one would output here. Oh, okay. So like the way it says return redirect action, you would literally just pass that string along. So you could literally take that variable and pass it along if you wanted to for the username one. But that's how, and we'll go over that more. I'm gonna have to play with the code. I'll probably do another update soon on it to where we can see on here. But you're basically building a controller to format your data in a way that you can access it and put it out in the bot. So like the same way all of the ways you would have to access and format the data for all the ways you would have to access and format the data for visualizing it, and that would probably have to be done in a controller as well. For the user logs controller, the home controller, you would have to add the math for that. That same level of formatting is going to go in the home controller of like, how is your text laid out? How is it accessed? What is strings? What are ints? How are they formatted? What over what? X versus Y. The same stuff we were kind of showing on there. That's the same way you would access it through the app. So once you've connected to your local host, this, which in our case we're going to call, so let's call yours applications. So /application. When we run the local host, this directory is where you're sending your commands with Xamarin. The same way that the commands are happening with the chat. Xamarin will be sending your HTTP requests through there this way. So yeah, that's how it would be doing the forward links, and then you would just access these different controllers to display them different ways. Like I said, I'll have a way better idea of how this is going to work after a day or two of playing with it, because one problem at a time, and this has been a million problems, and I've been taking on what I can. So we'll get more in depth of how that accesses it too, as I get a better idea of where we're going with it. Anyone else in the chat? Anyone else got any questions for this one? Do I need to cover anything else? Would anyone like to see anything else? Having a fun quarantine? Yeah? Good quarantine? Have I covered everything that needs to be addressed on this one? All right, guys. Well, I'm going to call it an evening on this one. I will be back starting tomorrow with my regular show, the quarantine session stuff we're doing. But I'll keep dropping these in as we go along the project. I'm using these to walk my team through the code and communicate and answer questions and stuff. So we're going to do another update soon. We'll keep checking in with this. I'll probably keep doing these code sessions because I enjoy them. They're fun. If anybody has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll do everything I can to answer them. Probably will post code at some point after the project. I don't know. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you guys for engaging with me. And if there's anything you need, just feel free to let me know. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. How can I help you? So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.